Welcome back to the Podcasting Problem Solver. I'm Leah Bryant, your podcast growth strategist. So I want to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to take you behind the scenes of my show, not to talk about microphones or editing software or any of the production stuff, but to show you what intentional podcasting looks like in practice. And you might chuckle because the last month has been very sporadic with my podcast publishing. But we will just say, do as I say, not as I do, putting clients first, all the other things. But that's just where we are, and I digress. So I talk a lot on this show about strategy and listener journeys, about episodes having jobs. And at some point, I figured that it was worth showing you what that looks like with my show and not just in theory, okay? So today, I'm going to walk you through how I run the Podcasting Problem Solver, decisions behind the topics I pick, how I think about my listener arc, how every episode connects to my business, and what changed when I stopped just recording whatever felt interesting and started treating this show like the business asset it is. Before I get into what intentional podcasting looks like, I want to be real about what the alternative looks like. Because most of us have been there and it doesn't always feel like a problem when you're in it. Okay, so winging it looks like sitting down on a Sunday night and asking yourself, what should I record this week? It could also look like picking a topic because it came up in a Facebook group or you saw another podcaster do something similar. It might look like recording, editing, and publishing, then moving on without ever knowing if that episode did anything for your business. Now, the tricky part is that winging it can produce good content. Yes, you can wing it and still be helpful and get decent downloads. So it doesn't feel like anything is ever really missed. It just feels like you're working really hard for results that are smaller than they should be, right? So what winging it costs you isn't quality, it's compounding, right? So when each episode is an independent decision made in a moment, none of them really build on each other. There's no arc, no strategic thread connecting your content to your offers, right? You're essentially starting from scratch every single week, and that is an exhausting way to grow a show. It's basically like hitting rewind on a cassette tape every single Monday, and all that effort goes back to zero, right? If this is ringing a little too true for you right now, that's exactly the cycle we break inside Position and Found. It's my group program where we will build a strategy that makes every episode intentional and every week easier than the last. The waitlist link is in the show notes. Come join us. So here is what doing it this way looks like for me and what I want it to look like for you. Each episode on this show starts with a question. And it's not, what do I want to talk about? It is, what does my listener need to hear right now that moves them closer to solving their podcast problem? That's a different question that points outward instead of inward, and it gives me very different topics. Now, my listener is an established business owner, usually a coach or a service provider, who has a podcast that's been running for a hot minute, but it's not converting the way that it should be. They're not a beginner who needs basic setup advice. They need strategic thinking that they can apply right away. So each episode has to clear that bar before I can record it. Is this useful to that specific person? And does it meet them where they are? From there, I think about the arc of the content. This show is more than a collection of episodes. I think of it as a deliberate sequence, okay? Topics build on each other. So earlier episodes in the month might set up a problem, and later episodes go deeper on a solution. I think about which episodes should be an entry point for new listeners, like the ones with the strongest searchable titles, the clearest hooks, and the most universal problems. And I also think about which episodes are for my existing listeners who already trust me and who are ready to go deeper on a given topic. So each episode also has a job. I say this all the time, right? Some episodes are designed to build awareness around a problem that my listener didn't necessarily know that they had. And some will deepen trust by showing them that I understand their situation in detail. That is the key. And some are built to warm them toward position and found. Because at the end of the day, my podcast is a lead gen tool, and I am not apologetic about that. My podcast is doing a job for my business, and that is by design. And yours should be like that too. And I pay attention to what's working. So, which episodes are getting those downloads from search? Which ones are generating the most DMs and inquiries? And which ones do people quote back to me? That pattern spotting tells me what my audience wants more of. And it feeds directly back into my content planning. Nothing gets ignored because everything is data. So I want to be straight up with you about something. And yes, I could have been very funny and added something about Paula Abdul and straight up now tell me. But what I just described doesn't happen on its own. It didn't happen overnight for me either, okay? I did not start the show with any of what I just described. I picked random topics. I had no real arc connecting my episodes. And my results reflected all of that, friend. Yes, they did. No conversions, no inquiries, none of it. Just a lot of episodes going out into the world and doing nothing. Whole lot of effort and a whole lot of nothing. It wasn't until I got crystal clear on who I was talking to, what I wanted them to do after listening, and how each episode was supposed to connect to the next, that things shifted. My Get Found audits started getting booked. By the way, that link is in the show notes. Emails started coming in. My discovery calls started filling up even more than they already were. And none of that was because my content suddenly got better. No, it was all because my foundation was finally doing its job. Strategic podcasting requires you to know your listener well enough to make decisions on their behalf. It requires you to be clear enough on your own offer and positioning that every episode can point somewhere meaningful. And it also requires you to be willing to treat your podcast as a business tool first. Hear me when I say that. As a business tool first and a creative outlet second, which, if you love your show, and I know that you do, that can feel very uncomfortable because there's a version of podcasting that's really about self-expression. And also it's about sharing ideas because you find them interesting, right? And that version is absolutely valid. And we don't want to lose that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I am talking about a podcast that grows your business, okay? And those two things can absolutely coexist, but the business function has to be built in purpose because it does not happen by accident. The podcasters that I see growing consistently, that are converting listeners into clients and building that real momentum, they all made a decision at some point to stop treating their podcast like just another content obligation. And they started treating it like a strategy. And that shift is everything. So I worked with a health coach who'd been running her podcast for a bit when she came to me. And she loved recording her podcast, which is not always the case. But she had no idea if it was doing anything for her business. She couldn't point to a single client and say, "Ooh, that person found me through the podcast." But when we looked at her show together, the pattern was very clear to me. Her topics were all over the place. She had some episodes about mindset, some about meal planning. There was no real thread or consistent arc, right? There were no call to actions that were really worth mentioning. And the show felt more like a scrapbook of things she'd been thinking about, which isn't necessarily wrong or bad or nothing, but it wasn't working as a business tool for her. So I asked her to get specific about who she was making the show for and what she wanted those people to do after listening. Then we rebuilt her content arc so episodes connected to each other and led somewhere. So yes, we are building those bridges. We wrote call to actions that pointed to her offer instead of just saying, ooh, follow me on Instagram. And we also identified 3 episodes in her back catalog that were already pulling lots of downloads and turned those into really awesome entry points for her new listeners. So by fixing her foundation, she was able to go back to recording, but now she had a structure underneath and it made everything else count. And 4 months later, she had her first client who specifically said, oh my gosh, I found you through your podcast and listened to 6 episodes, and then I had to reach out. And that had never happened before. And what made the difference was the strategy and having that foundation. So here's what I want you to take away from today. Pull up your podcast and ask yourself these questions. 1, if a stranger landed on my show today, would they understand who it's for and what they're going to get? Or would they have to figure that out on their own? 2, can I point to at least one client in the last 6 months who found me through the podcast? Or at least got warmer because of it? If not, the show might not have a clear enough job yet. 3, do my last 10 episodes feel like they're building towards something? Or do they feel like 10 independent pieces of content that just happen to share an RSS feed? Because your answers are going to tell you a lot here about where your show is and what needs to change to get it working the way you want it to. Now, everything that I just walked you through maps to my Seamless Podcast Framework. The strategic positioning phase is where you get crystal clear on your listener, your show's purpose, and how it connects to your business. The attraction phase is where you make the show findable and the content arc intentional. And then execution is where you show up consistently, but the strategy and the attraction has to be there in order for all of that to work together. Okay? So what I described about my own show is not magic. No, it is not. I am not bibbidi boppity booing over here, waving magic wands like a fairy godmother. I mean, I do, but not for my own podcast. It's what happens when all 3 layers are working together. The compounding effects kick in, okay? Episodes start building on each other, and listeners start moving through your world instead of just consuming individual pieces of content. And the podcast is starting to do its job. So that's what the Seamless Podcast Framework looks like in practice. The seams don't show because every decision connects to the one before it. See what I did there? If today made you want to stop, collaborate, and listen, no, I'm kidding. If today's episode made you want to stop winging it and build this with intention, Position and Bound is where it happens. We are going to spend about 10 weeks together building the strategy and attraction layers that makes everything else work. Who your show is for, what it's built to do, how your episodes connect to your offers, and how to set up a listener journey that is actually going to move people closer to working with you. Group coaching, so you're doing the work alongside other established business owners who are in the same exact position you are. And I'm there too. So waitlist is open. Go sign up. You will not want to wait. I'm only going to have 6 people in this beta round. Got something super special for the beta people too. Go check it out. And that's it for today. If this one gave you something useful that you were going to implement for your show, share it with someone else who has been podcasting on autopilot and wondering why their needle is not moving. Until next week, keep your podcast intentional and keep your growth seamless, and I will talk with you soon. Bye for now.